Hey everyone, how you doing? Do you know the difference between making a library for TypeScript versus JavaScript? Now, I always thought TypeScript and JavaScript were the same thing. Essentially, TypeScript is just JavaScript with types, but that's absolutely not the case. It's more than that, but also when you're writing libraries or tools or utilities or functions in TypeScript, you're doing it differently from how you would do it in JavaScript. I've got Lenz Weber here with me, and that's what we're going to talk about. So I talked to Lenz Weber about OneForm, a form library I built for React, and this is our first time meeting. He goes into this topic, and so I wanted to pull that topic out of the code conversation that we were going to make and make that a separate video, and this is that video. Hope you enjoy.
There's one thing I want to point out here in your display text value thing, because it's sticking out for me a little bit.
Yeah, this one.
This is a library that's written for JavaScript and they're translating to TypeScript, and that makes a big difference because with TypeScript in mind, it would probably have been designed very differently. We can make it work, and it will work well. It will have okay-ish TypeScript support, but there are certain things that can just not be done in TypeScript, like making a connection between that input and that field value, and somehow in TypeScript noticing like, okay, this will hold a string or this will hold a number, because this is JSX, and that JSX gets evaluated without really the context of where things are being used and stuff. So you cannot really restrict it down to this can only be used with a string or something, because JSX here is missing the context. Everything in here is just a child with a type a JSX.element. So you never can really 100% pin it down. If you wanted to do that, the whole thing would need a very different approach probably. And that's why if you look at many other libraries, they are designed a completely different way, because probably the person who wrote them had TypeScript in mind first and was like, okay, how can I somehow design this library to give me the perfect TypeScript autocomplete or something like that. It's totally okay, but we can't get to that last little bit because just the general design makes it impossible.
Yeah, and you don't mean my library specifically. You're talking about React as well, because React is not associating this inputs type with the field value type. So you won't know field value is going to display a string. You're just hoping it's going to be a string.
Yeah. In another library, you would maybe say, okay, I'm not using their input, and I'm also not really using an input component, but I create a higher order component thingy that I call OneForm, and that I give specific types in the beginning. And then that has like OneForm.form, and you wrap that around, and you have OneForm.inputField or .field.input. And then it knows, okay, if I put the name message in, then it has to be string. And if I go with the field value down there, and I do my initialized OneForm.field value, and I put name message in there, then that's pinned down. But that would require like different library design from the start. So without rewriting that or changing that around, we just cannot get to that point, because here we can't make that connection purely by where we are in the tree. We would need some code connection that's just not existing here.
Yeah, because right now the only thing that connects these two is this name prop, but there's nothing telling us in the code that this name and this name are associated, and that the type should be somehow associated as well.
Yeah, as a human, when you look at it, you see that, like, I see the scope. They are in the same scope. They must mean the same thing. But with TypeScript, you cannot make that connection without really connecting it by code. And there's just no concept in here that could make us connect them by code. That's just something I want to point out for your viewers too, that maybe want to do their own library. Converting these libraries that were made for JavaScript into TypeScript oftentimes gets to those limitations, because otherwise it would have to have been designed completely differently from the beginning. I've been talking with Tanner Lindsley about that when he was going for, I think, the rewrite of React Table or React Table now. And he was super frustrated that the old approach he was using there was essentially not working, and he had to connect everything to get those types in place. And he iterated, I think, over 3 or 4 different, probably millions designs, until he found something where he could put all those contextual information he wanted to have as autocomplete in the end into the type of one monster object that somewhere where it gets built in the beginning. And that just makes for very different library design in that place.
Yeah, actually, this is really surprising to me. I had no clue. I didn't even think about it until you said it. And as soon as you said it, I realized, oh, yeah, there's no way. And then you kept going. I was like, oh, so it has to be more, I guess, tightly coupled at that point because the type system, if you don't have any tight coupling, you can't tightly couple the tights. You can't say that this is related to this one. Yeah, that makes sense. So in a lot of JavaScript libraries, like you're saying, are more decoupled from that aspect and not used to that design process. And it doesn't mean it's a bad tightly coupled either. I have a whole presentation on tight coupling, and this is a tight coupling where it makes sense because these are all part of the same library, and you don't necessarily need every piece. It doesn't mean that they're tightly coupled like you need all the pieces, but it is tightly coupled in that the types all need to be there, and then everything else is optional.
That's, for example, if you look at stuff like RTK query, you build it from the ground up. Like you write the configuration in the beginning, and then it gives you all those building pieces that are like ingrained with that information about the whole state, and then you can use it everywhere.
Oh, like I create a slice, you're saying?
Yeah, or with RTK query, you build an API that has all the endpoints and all the return types from every endpoint in it and stuff like that.
Oh, so then you can associate, the return type of this endpoint is actually the same as the return type of this other endpoint.
You can also say stuff like, now I want to invalidate this stuff and I want to invalidate that. It only can check if you put the right arguments into one of those helper functions if everything has been built from the beginning. If you later add things on top, you might get like incomplete type information or partial type information, and that part that you're interested in is just missing. That's the problem that we get if we start splitting those definitions over multiple files, because you don't have that one file where all the types come together anymore. You have like multiple parts that add to the piece, and you don't really have all the parts in place all the time. So it's really a philosophy thing. Do I go to the point where I put all of that together, or is it okay if I don't have all of it together? And often it is. That's really like just where you come from, how do you design it from the ground. And here we are with something that's designed from the ground and in the specific way where we would have to say, yeah, we cannot do that, or we would have to change the way it would have to be used for it.
Yeah, I wouldn't even know how to change it, because I've never done that before.
We can do a very small example of that if you want to.
Yeah, let's do that. And just it's not my code, right? You're talking about just write a small example code, or you're talking about change? Okay.
But I'm looking a little bit at your use case on the left over here. So we're kind of getting close to that. And that would mean that you write a function that you maybe call create one form.
Oh, and then it gives you all the components.
And you give that one function, you give it like the type as a generic argument in the beginning, and you specify which fields you want to have on that in the end. Or you could even infer that from an initial state that you put into that one.
Well, what about like dynamic forms, which is something that this supports, where you can just dynamically create states all over the place of whatever type you want and name?
Then you would have to at least couple the field. Then you would say something like create field, and it would return you like a tuple of the field and the field value, and you would use those side by side.
So anytime you create a field,
they would be coupled by type.
I see. It would give you these functions. Okay, that gives me good information. That's not necessarily how I want the library to work, but it might be something that I could look at in the future. It just sucks because it's more boilerplate, and the whole point of this is to get rid of the boilerplate. At the point where we create that boilerplate, it becomes a lot less useful for the library. Well, one, you don't need the cloning anymore. That's good, but also it becomes less useful because now you have to wrap every single one of these at the top of your file every time you want to use it with like a certain name or something like that, and then re-export those. Not in that, maybe it could be like one file, like an actions file for Redux. It would be one file that literally has a re-export of every possible field value. But then also, if you want to dynamically create field values, now you got to set up like use memos and use effects and other things in there to handle the dynamic creation of fields with like a create field, and then add that component to a state, and then take that state and then pop it in.
I wouldn't say that, honestly, because remember, we're only working on the type level here. That could very well be a function that returns the same every time you call it.
Yeah, it does return the same object, but the types on each one would be different.
The types would change, but it literally mean the same object. Like you call it 10 times and you get references to 10 times exactly the same object. So you wouldn't be concerned about use memo or use callback.
Oh, you're saying I memorize it behind the scenes.
You don't even need to memorize it at all, because the only reason we're calling this is to nail a type on it.
It's the same component that's being created. The only difference is this type that's coming in here. So it's like a string here, but that's inferred. This is the type inference that gets inferred by whatever you pass in here as the initial value. Unless you need to, for some reason you have null, then you need to specify here that it is string or null or something like that, because otherwise you can't infer that it's a string. Okay, you're saying I could use that, and then I can even use it in place, and it doesn't matter because it's going to be the same one. It's just a type thing that changes, but literally the JavaScript is unchanged.
Exactly. So if you would really go ahead and say you
but I might have to do
field value here from the top.
I might have to do something like this too, because there could be multiple in my app, or in this particular form. There could be multiple field values in the same one that I'm creating. I'm calling this function. So then you'd have to name these differently based on the type that they're using, which is also kind of annoying. It's not as convenient as just using field.
My thought would be like you just import it and export it, but that's not the point here. For renaming, probably depends if you really go for the object here. But then you could still say something like const string is like equals create field, and then you just use string.field and string.field value as components or something. So you don't need to destructure here.
Yeah, that string.field would make more sense than field.string, because that makes sense. So you said basically at the top of your app you create all these. When you have dynamic fields though, you're still having to create these on the fly, and then you'd have to basically, this would be like dynamic field or whatever. You could just be field at that point, whatever you want to use it for, because if it's a dynamic field, you're able to create it on the fly, and it doesn't matter what the names of these are, because you're not gonna have a namespace conflict.
I mean, the question is also like how dynamic you get in the end, because this sounds incredibly dynamic, and I can't really think of an application where I'm like, okay, this could be anything. Usually you have some certain structure behind every form, and in this place you might have 1 or 2 or 500 fields of this kind, but if it's nested at this point in the field, it will always be a string, or it will always be something that's either a string or a number or something, but you can pinpoint it down pretty much. So that's where I was coming with my I could do create field but create form in the beginning from, because you do create form at the top of the file, and you describe all the possible shapes that one form could take, and then you just start working on that.
Yes, that makes sense. Also, I forgot that some fields can be an array, a string array, or whereas we've talked about on Twitter, also it could be formatted this way. I think it's this. Yeah. Depending on what you need for what situation you're using. Yeah, you could use it. I like this one better personally. Yeah. But I use this one because it's more common and people will understand it better. Even though I don't understand it as a newer to TypeScript. Like, this is extremely confusing to me, because if you put in here, this is the index that you've got. So maybe I should just rewrite it for this purpose. I think there was an issue for doing it with the array here, but I'm not exactly sure what that is. But so here's all the different types, but I don't want something that could be any of these. I want something that's very specific, like it's either string or null, or it's Boolean or null, or it's an array of string or null. I don't want anything that's all of these or null, if that makes sense. Yeah. So I would have to create like a this or null type, and then a string or null type, and then it can only choose one of those and hold it. Is there a way to do that?
Well, this instantiation is essentially the place where you would do that. But still, I'm not really sure if that way of like creating a string field is what you really want, because you still don't have the connection to the name. And what you really want to do is to do the connection by the name, right?
Oh, because you're saying I could use a field that's a string field, and then I could have exported a Boolean field value and just use that. But there's no way that it's going to tell me that that's wrong, because it wouldn't know that that's the wrong. Yeah,
because you're missing the context again.
The name,
in this place, I'm putting something and it's not working again. Just hammer something in the chat, and the editor is going to have fun with that to copy paste it out, or to cut a little bit while I'm typing. But it's probably easier to just write that down.
I had no clue we'd go into this much depth before we even looked at the code. We just talking about this
stuff. We're just having fun.
Oh my god, yeah. It's so much stuff that I didn't know. Anybody who's going to watch this, who even knows TypeScript, I think you'd like, I would say I know TypeScript, but enough to get by. And even though I've done most of my library with it, and I've done some pretty complex things, I can't imagine. I just learned something new that blew my mind. I thought, like, as we're going through it, you'll start picking out things. There'll be small changes I make here and there. I didn't think it would be that within the first 10 minutes, I've already gotten my mind blown. I have no clue what's going on. I don't even know if now I got to rethink how I design everything from the ground up. So I've architected so many solutions for JavaScript.
Yeah, you really write something completely different. And of course, that's a weird mindset at first. But if you think about it a little bit, it also kind of makes sense in the end. How do you use that field value, for example? Is it like you have a render props thing in there, or?
No, so I don't use render props because it's just pulling it from the context. So it does a lookup. This is a JSX file, so this has not been converted.
So it really just displays it. It doesn't do any
look, it's just a string. So you could use it as a prop. You could do like check this out. You could do something like this. You could do that and put it in the ID of a div because it's just a string that comes out of it. Changes how you use React. So what we got here? 3 errors.
So we have that helper type in the top. We can pretty much ignore those errors here right now. I'm a little bit irritated that JSX is erroring on you.
Oh, that's probably because I have it set up without the JSX and the TSS config. No?
Yeah.
I mean...
set up. Huh.
That's right. I usually don't, though. But
let's try if it works.
Yeah, let me change it and then change it back. Okay, so I go here and then change... Wow, I changed to ES3.
Oh, dear. Internet Explorer is calling.
Yeah. I don't private name JSX. That's weird. Do we need to import it from React or something? Import.
Yeah, you can do a React element. So just import
there it goes.
element
you got
itself.
It. It's not there. Oh,
No,
it's part of Babel, right? Or TypeScript, sorry.
No. It was enough for JSX to load, actually, because it's somewhere in the dependencies. Just do import React on the top, and that will work.
Okay.
That pulls it in far enough.
Okay, great. Yeah, we got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like that's declared but never read. That's okay because obviously we don't care about the implementation right now.
Mm-hmm.
And then you would have something like const my form equals create form, and you put like the whole state of how you want your form to be in. And if you hover that my form thing,
it's a form with it, or so record is an object, and this is the key is a string, and the value is unknown.
That is a little bit.
You wrote unknown here though.
Yeah. That should not be unknown, though. Oh, yeah, that's not valid JavaScript. You need to give the argument. Like I just wrote the type in line 8, but not the name for the variable. The argument needs a name.
Argument needs a name. This one or this argument?
Yeah. This is just the type, and left for it there has to be a variable name and a colon.
Oh, you're saying like this?
Yeah.
Like this?
Yeah. No, it's. No, that was already enough even, but yeah, that doesn't hurt either. And now if you hover my form...
Oh, wow, okay. It's like magic.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see here. So it's expecting first name as a field with a string and age as a number.
Yeah, that's kind of inferred by usage here. So we created that my form by calling a create form with that first name and that age. If you would put something else there as an initial state, it would have completely different types in the end. But what you can do now, if you just write a component below that, just write any function as a component there.
Yeah, I don't think I have to just do this.
No, just like...
okay. Const.
Yeah.
Did I spell it right?
Yeah, just an arrow function there. And in there you could try to use... my form itself is not a component right now, but my form dot field should be one. Yeah.
Okay. Is this, let's see, how you set up the type is a JSX, so it can take children. Okay, then this would be like...
It could take children, but it won't do anything with the children because you have the problem with the children that they are not really working with it.
So the name could be first name or age, so if I type a name...
And it only accepts one of the possible names.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
And the other thing is you have that use my form value hook that you also have in your library. So if you try using that, so there's a
use field value.
Form dot use field value hook.
Okay, so we would use this here. Let's make it easier to read. Okay, so we do this, and then so I don't know how to use this. Okay.
It's my form dot.
Oh, yeah, of course it is.
It's scoped again to my form.
My bad. Okay, so then it takes a name, okay, and that's the only arg, great, and then it gives me even options. Oh, I have to put the string first.
No, you just you pass it in without the name.
Of course, yeah, you're right too. Oh man, I'm so confused. Okay, there we go. And
that, if you assign that to a value, and that's a string now.
Technically, I can add an input here, just a bare input, and I can do the same.
I mean that part is pretty much missing.
Like that.
This is now a string hard-coded because in the initial state up there it was a string. And if instead you go for use field value age, you will get back a number.
But it's not complaining here that the input's wrong because it doesn't know. Yeah.
Well,
this is not associated because it's not myform.input or whatever.
Yeah,
it's,
exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So essentially, to get that tight coupling, have to have that central point, like we have create form here, and that pulls in all the information we have about our final shape in the end. Like it will have a first name that's a string, it will have an age that's a number, it will maybe have something that's an array of strings or something like that for your dynamic fields, or it even has something that's any if it's super dynamic in that part, and using any if you actively really want to, that's okay. But then you have to use this myForm, which is that part that has all the types in it, and everything has to be kind of on that. And you have to design your API a little bit around that part that you always have to call that.
Yeah, I mean, I could still do. And just so people don't think you have to do this pattern, you could still do this.
Yeah, of course.
And do the deconstruction of it. And it still has the type in there, the ages and all.
That would actually work even better with the ESLint rules for hooks, because ESLint rules for hooks are kind of wobbly sometimes if you're nested deeper into an object. It wouldn't really recognize those as hooks in some points and not enforce the rules of hooks and stuff like that.
Yeah. This is incredible. Okay, so then I feel like I'm going to become React hook form if I keep going further, because what would happen here, mine already does this internally, my use field. This wouldn't be a value here. It would be an object that contains the value, the on change, and a name prop.
Yeah.
And that those things would then get dotted like in here. It wouldn't be the way I do rendering. I do the clone element, but it would be something like this. And I would clone it in there. And it wouldn't be but the thing is, it does it behind the scenes. You don't have to manually wire up a hook, then get the object, name the object, and then pass it dotting into the field yourself. And mine's a little bit different, so you can just wrap it in a field component and it would just do that for you.
Yeah, you copy the children, apply additional props and all that stuff, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, mine would be like, in this case it'd be called my field, or would you call it field? You just call it field. All right. So it'd be field, and then you just wrap the input in field, and it would do all the work for you. And yeah, like if you're using the hook, you would basically, whatever's in there, it would be like field props, something like that. And if you're using the hook, you would just put it on the input. But if you're not using the field, then all you have to do here is the name, like this, and it would be age in this case, and it would do all that work for you. And you wouldn't have anything on here at that point. So you just put the name there, and you just have your input. And this could be your, text input or text field or whatever you're going to call it for your component library. And then also something else that I have as a escape hatch essentially is that if your field doesn't line up with the props that I'm going to pass it, because I have very specific HTML input prop names, then you can wrap this field yourself and create one for just your library. And in this case, it would also contain the types that you would want in there too, because you'd have some function to wrap this field and translate the props. You're essentially creating your own field component for your form, for your inputs in your component library. But it's a lot more confusing. I mean, this is definitely a lot more complicated. So if I want to convert one form JavaScript to TypeScript, I can do that, like you're saying. But if I want to convert it to be TypeScript native, I have to do something more like this, which is significantly more difficult.
Yeah. If you go really for, this is not working in TypeScript, but this is like being made to work the best possible way with TypeScript, you really have to change the whole way the library is set up and the whole way the library is thought, essentially.
Yeah.
And that's for every library maintainer I've talked so far. It's incredibly frustrating in the beginning, and then they start experimenting and they're like, ooh, this gets interesting. So essentially, like, I totally see you now getting that library to work nicely with TypeScript, but that's it. Also, I'm pretty sure a certain kind of spark has been set now, and in 2 years down the road, you probably have rewritten the whole thing with a completely new interface because you were just like inspired by the challenge or something. That's what usually happens.
So I'm feeling not inspired right now. I feel defeated. Like, this is so much work. It's so complicated. It's not even worth it to do it. But yeah, next time I do a project or something, I'll probably do this way. And then once I've done that, then I'll go back to one form and fix it. One form probably won't be where I do it. It's just so complicated. There's so much complexity in forms to build them with performance in mind, with React and doing all these things. It's hard enough just to get the TypeScript in there. I don't even want to fathom. It seems like, look, it's so easy. We just did it. Yeah, but not in the whole. The thing that's bothering me now is how do I make this dynamic, that it can dynamically change the types of the fields and these inputs here over time. And you're going to have to create functions to do that and essentially modify the generic somehow, right?
Yeah, I mean, coming from my perspective, if I look at it, a first name will always be a string and an age will always be a number. But I would probably add more properties on that have slightly different names, because that way also when you're using all of it, you have a lot more security as a user, that you're not suddenly using something at the wrong point in time and it changed the type and it's exploding in the end. So
yeah, I mean, I can limit this down even more. I think I can. You would call create form more often than just once, but for, let's say, an address book. This is a great, because we got age and first name could be in an address book. So you have these things. First name would always be a string. Age would always be a number. The only difference is you would have multiple forms that have that data. There would be one form. There would be only one form in your application, because that form needs to create validation across multiple first name fields and multiple ages and stuff like that. It wouldn't do it for first names, though. It'd be like birthday. Birthday, you can only have one birthday per person, but it might be like a phone number, and the form would be able to validate that the phone number that you set for this user or something is, each person can't have two of the same phone number, for instance. So you need to be able to validate something like that. You could have a form which is just one person's address, but it could be, for some reason, there's more information there. Like, you're adding a phone number. That's a dynamic field, is what I'm trying to say. So there is a form that says, okay, I have a phone number, right? Like this. Phone number, and that phone number is a string, but it's not a string because there could be two phone numbers, 5 phones. So now it's an array of strings, right? Because you have multiple strings there. So now it becomes an array of strings. So maybe I can still figure this out. Maybe it's possible to do with dynamic forms, but I'm not 100% sure, right? I'm just thinking of it while we're talking.
So what I'm seeing you describe here would be essentially you have not one form, but you have one big data set.
One big data set.
You create multiple forms on that data set.
Yes, that's what it sounds like. Yeah, you're definitely making it more sparky now than I felt before. It feels less problematic, although it still feels problematic because there's so much I have to figure out. Thanks everyone for watching. I know that kind of cut off abruptly because this was actually an excerpt from a larger code conversation video, but the point here is that there is a very different way of writing libraries with TypeScript in mind than doing it just for JavaScript. The JavaScript execution is fine, even with or without TypeScript. But if you develop it for TypeScript, you can get better documentation and usability of your tools for people using your library. This is something that's going to be in a future video, but TypeScript is not about types, it's about documentation. And that's why it's important to know that there is a better way of developing things when you think TypeScript first. Feel free to leave a like and comment and subscribe. I would really appreciate the feedback, and I will respond to you if you ask me a question. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Thank you.